Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today as part of our inaugural Tigunia virtual forum. We greatly appreciate everybody that's joined us for the presentation today. We hope the information shared during the presentation is beneficial to you and your team after you leave here today. My name is Tristan Threlkeld. I'm the Director of Sales here at Tigunia. I'll be your moderator for this presentation. It should be about 45 minutes in material and about 15 minutes for Q&A for a total of 60 minutes overall. We encourage that you ask questions as this is ultimately about providing you with as much information as possible. You should be able to see the little question symbol, that little box there, that's your Q&A. Go ahead and type your question in there throughout the session. We'll be happy to get that to Ryan, our presenter today, and get that question answered for you. Okay, well, with all that said, without further delay, let me introduce you to Ryan Patterson, our Director of Business Intelligence and Reporting.
Great, thanks, Tristan. And thanks everybody for joining today. I'm honored to have you in attendance, and I think you'll get a lot of information out of this next 45 minutes worth of content. In today's session, what we're going to be taking a look at is Jet Analytics, which is a data warehousing automation tool powered by TimeXtender. And we're going to kind of focus at the Business Central data, in that we're going to build a data warehouse in CubeSet off of Business Central during the course of this session, right? It's such a fast tool for rapid deployment that we'll be able to do that and actually see data inside of this cube by the time we wrap this all up. So why would I need a data warehousing automation tool, right? So the main reasons why you might need something like Jet Analytics is because businesses today face a dual challenge. We are now seeing more data than ever before, right? Not only is it coming from our ERPs, but now every little device that we have has additional data points that we might want to see. We might want to track all of our phone call logs. We might want to track all of our chat messages or our ticketing systems and all of our time entries, right? And typically, these are all in disparate systems, meaning that our data lives in different places, right? To make any kind of insight off of that, we'd have to be basically copying and pasting data from a bunch of different locations, right? Well, with Jet Analytics, you don't have to do that. Instead, we'll be able to pull it all together into a single project, right? On top of that, normally how you would normally pull all of the data together is a kind of a cumbersome and time-consuming process. While it can definitely be done by hand, using SQL code, using SSIS, and kind of manipulating the data by hand, if you will, from point A to point B and getting it into a cleansed state, it can be very time consuming. It can also be very difficult because since it's time consuming, you're going to have multiple people working on this, and confusion can happen simply by naming convention difficulties, and you get to a spot where you have 5 copies of the same field inside of your data warehouse table, but with different names, right? On top of that, some of the more common troubles that people have is just pulling data from these different data sources, right? You might have a SQL database for your ERP, but maybe you have a web-based data source for Google Analytics, and then you have a MySQL database that was used for your time entry, and then all of your budgets is living in an Excel file, right? Well, how do you pull all that together and make actionable insights quickly, right? And this is where kind of the Jet Analytics powered by TimeXtender piece fits in. It can simplify and automate all of these steps, right? So what is it, right? Well, Jet Analytics is a tool sold by Insight Software, powered by TimeXtender. We are partners and friends with folks from both sides of that graphic there, and super happy that we are in this position to be able to showcase this tool to you, right? I kind of think of myself as almost like a TimeXtender evangelist to some degree, because the tool has simplified so many aspects of what I've done for 2 decades that I just see nothing but wins and gains from it. So it's a data warehouse automation tool. What that means is, in data warehouse automation is a whole nother beast, if you will, and we'll cover that in a little bit. But basically, it automates all of those steps that would normally be done by hand and pulls it into a kind of a single repository or single location for that to be built. It allows your team to then kind of work in tandem, because now they'll all be able to see the same, their code from different people, right? Their colleagues. It'll all be inside of that same project. And as such, since it's all inside of the same kind of project and building in the same environment, we can start to kind of streamline that data warehousing lifecycle management platform, right? No longer do we have 5 developers trying to build the same thing but with different names, but we can kind of streamline it. They're all going to be there. And at the end of the day, it provides automation for all of this, right? So we build up a model, and the automation aspect is we can set it to run and execute and update the data warehouse in cubes as frequently as makes sense to do, right? In some cases, that can be every 10 minutes or so. In other cases where there's an immense amount of data, maybe that's nightly, right? So there's definitely different execution schedules depending on your size of data and your reporting needs, but we can automate all of that, right? Just like you can in SSIS, but we can also automate the creation of it. And that's where this tool really shines. So what would it solve? It would solve basically all of your development woes, right? And I know that sounds like a sales pitchy type of thing to say, but there's a lot of truth in it. It makes it so that data access from all of these multiple disparate locations can be streamlined and put into a single tool. It frees up the amount of hand work or development work that you need to actually create, because a lot of those steps are now kind of automated within the tool. And it also gives us not only is it quicker to build, but it makes it quicker from concept to insight, right? We can actually get data insights from our build much, much quicker than if we were waiting on hand development, right? And I've actually, I can speak from a point of experience here, because I've had to build a cube by hand in the past. I've actually raced teams, teams of people that were building cubes by hand, and built it inside of Jet Analytics in a fraction of the time. And so that's where it solves a lot of your, like I said, your development woes, right? So lastly, let's just take a quick peek at like a high level, what does the environment look like, right? Well, I know, on the screen, the big word there, Discovery Hub, you're kind of like, what's that? TimeXtender, the tool that Jet Analytics is powered by TimeXtender, right? And so the Discovery Hub is what TimeXtender calls it. It's one and the same as far as that goes. But you can kind of see on this graphic, and that's why I used it. You can see how the data movement happens, right? We pull in the data from our source, whether that's a cloud source, a traditional database system of some sort, or flat files, whether those are CSVs or Excel files, right? And we pull it into our database, our staging database, the ODX. And from there, that's that extract step. We're then going to transform and load this data into our data warehouse and into our semantic model, right? And that data is just kind of getting prepped. Once it's in that data warehouse and semantic model, though, we can then execute that, if you will, or populate different databases, whether that's out into a data lake type of environment, whether that's on your production reporting SQL server, right? Basically, we can stage this data on a server that makes sense for the business. No longer does that data have to be reported on directly from that source, right? You don't have to report directly against your ERP SQL Server database. And in fact, that's, not only are you sharing resources if you do something like that, but you run the risk of potentially, running a query that could take your ERP down, right? If a malformed query or something like that. So reporting directly against your operational databases is always you should always take that with a bit of caution. And so this is a way of kind of extrapolating that, right? Pulling it off of your main production servers, putting it onto a server that's built for this. So not only can we extrapolate data, pull it from all these other locations, but I kind of wanted to just kind of visually show what are some of those visual locations that we can start pulling data from, right? And the list is much longer than this, but these are some of the biggest ones, right? I have built a number of projects for each of these data sources, and they're common, right? Tigunia being a Microsoft Nav Business Central partner, we focused on the dynamics space, right? And so the Jet Analytics, TimeXtender, they both work very well with Business Central, Dynamics Nav, CRM, as well as AX and D365 Finance and Operations, right? The tool works extremely well with those, whether it's web service based or on premises, it can connect to each of that. But then above and beyond just the kind of the ERP level, if you will, that we work on a lot, it can also connect to a lot of these other extra data sources. QuickBooks, for instance, right? There are a lot of people that have kind of started with QuickBooks as an entry point, but have grown out of it. Companies get too large for QuickBooks pretty quickly, but you don't want to lose that history. Well, with Jet Analytics, we can pull that historical QuickBooks data in and have that reported right side by side with your next ERP, whether that's Business Central or whatever it may be, right? And we can also pull in data from a variety of places, right? Whether it's a CSV or an Excel file, we can hook up to some of those older databases out there on like DB2 stuff and like IBM databases, right? But also we can connect to all these cloud sources like Google Sheets and Salesforce and Google Analytics. So I like to say whatever data you have, there's probably a way to get to it, right? Whether it's an ADO driver or an ODBC driver that somebody's created, or if it's, if that hasn't been created, then that's where Tigunia also shines in that we have a whole app team here that is great with building out APIs and hooks like that. So anywhere your data lives, we can start pulling it into Jet Analytics, right? So enough of the sales pitchy stuff, right? That's kind of what Jet Analytics can do. It's a data warehousing automation tool. It sets up and pulls data from as many of these data sources as we need to streamline your reporting into a single data warehouse and CubeSet that is built for reporting and speed, right? And so with that, I'm going to actually jump over and we're going to go through the creation process of a CubeSet using a Business Central on-premise database and going from point A to Cube through this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Jet Data Manager server here. And the Jet Data Manager is effectively the application portion of Jet Analytics, right? Whatever term you've heard, it's Jet Analytics, Jet Enterprise is the previous name, Jet Data Manager, right? It's all the same tool, and this is the Jet Data Manager. If you noticed when it was opening, it said powered by TimeXtender. That's the tool that kind of is in the background here. And with the Jet Data Manager, Insight Software has made it so that we can get to a number of kind of pre-built projects, right? It's a good way of getting started for some folks. If you need, if you know that you have a GP database, for instance, you could start with this and it kind of creates a full CubeSet based off of that database for you to start with, right? So the Quick Cubes is pretty handy and it's a good way of getting started. But for what we're going to do today, we're actually going to just create a new project from scratch here and just kind of walk through this. So we're going to call this our TVF project, the Tigunia Virtual Forum. I'm just going to click OK, give it a name, click OK. And from here, I'm just going to start creating a couple of databases before we build out all of our connections. So I'm going to add a business unit. We're just going to call this my stage. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm just telling it where my databases live, right? So I'm going to say, go out to my server here, create a database called stage TVF. Cool, cool, cool. We're going to do the same thing for my data warehouse. oops, TVF, perfect. And then lastly, my CubeSets. We're going to go here and we're going to add a multi-dimensional server. Great. All right, so I've just kind of created some holding ground for our work. The data movement comes from our data sources here, so we can, as you can see, if I was to say add a new data source, we have a lot of different options here. The SQL servers, you know, kind of like that screen I just showed you, all those different options for connections, right? In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use a Dynamics Business Central adapter, because these adapters allow us to kind of read through the various company structures of these databases and pull them in as a single connection, rather than having to pull in the company name as part of the table. If you're familiar with Nav, the table structures, each table has name of the company. So if you had multiple companies, yeah, blah, 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 right? So this kind of streamlines that in so that company A, company B both have a customer table. It's just one customer table using the adapter, right? If I wanted to, I could just say connect to a SQL Server data source instead. Like if you had a homegrown database, for instance, that you wanted to connect to, that would be the option, or something along the lines of like an ODBC data source for an Access database, if you will, right? In this case, we're just going to say add a Business Central one, and I'm going to go ahead and let the wizard help me out here. And we're going to say it's a Microsoft SQL provider. We're going to call this BC. Again, just pointing to where this lives. So in this case, it's just right directly on my machine here. It's called nav demo because it didn't get updated, but it's Business Central database. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so it's asking me here, it's found these companies. I'm just going to go ahead and say, yep, I want to use both of my companies. And then I'm just going to go ahead and synchronize this so that it kind of pulls in all of the tables and understands it. What this is doing is it's really just scanning that database and finding all of the tables, all of the views that are out there, and making it so that we can see it as a selection list over here on the right-hand side. Okay, and at this point, we now have our project hooked up to our source database. I now see all of the tables that are out there, right? And there's a bunch, right? And so this is where it comes to, you kind of need to know some database structure. You also kind of need to know your dimensional modeling techniques and tactics, right? So in this case, since we're just going to kind of keep it simple, I'm going to build it off of the sales invoice line here. And we're just going to go there. There's my sales invoice line. And so from my sales invoice line, right, if you're not familiar with Nav, and the concept applies to pretty much all ERPs, right, there's going to be a transactional table out there that has all of your posted lines for sales, right? That's what this is. Okay, so there's elements within this that I know I want to have. I know I want to have the document number, right, so that I can tie back to any of the elements that are on my document header. I also want to bring in things like my bill to customer and my sell to customer so I can see who I sold it to. I want to bring in my posting date so I can tell when I pulled that in. I definitely want to have my quantity and my sales amount. I think it's probably just amount here. Yep. Okay. And lastly, I'm just going to bring in my location code. Okay. So we've selected in some fields, obviously not all of the fields, right? And the reason for it is if you look at this table, if I was to preview this table, for instance, you can see all of the fields that I've selected. These all have value. If I was to then say show all, well, there's a lot of junk out here, right? These other fields, like, yeah, they might be used in some environments, but in our environment here, they're not. This is also a good way to see if I need to bring in anything else, such as the item number, for instance. That would be a good one to bring in. Yeah. So bring in my item number. We'll leave the quantity. Cool. unit cost, all that stuff, right? But there's not many is the point. There's a lot of fields here, but there's not many that actually contain some stuff. So now that I've got that kind of constructed, if I was to expand my staging database over here, we can see here's that sales invoice line, and there's all of my fields that are coming from this. Great. So for sales pictures, with the way Nav works and the way most ERPs work, there's sales invoiced, and then we also have the credit memo side. So I'm going to go ahead and go find the inverse table, if you will, the sales credit memo line, and I'm just going to select in the exact same fields that I have here. So the document, the bill to customer. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to see the full picture, right? Not only is it just the invoiced sales, but did I have to credit anything back? Did we see any returns? Did anything have to go back out, right? That's just in order to see the full picture of what our actual sales looks like. Bring that in, amount, location code, and the number. Okay. Great. So there we go. Now I've got two different tables inside of my staging database, right? The way that this all kind of flows is we kind of climb the ladder up. We pull our data from our data source, selected the right tables and fields, and that's put it into our staging database. That's that first rung on the ladder, if you will. Once we're done kind of doing some cleansing steps or any calculations that we might need to do on these tables, it then climbs up into our data warehouse here for our first level of reporting, and then lastly into our cubes. So before I do that, there's a couple of things that I wanted to extend on this. So we brought in the document number for both of these. I've also brought in customers and locations, right? And as well as items. So there's a few different dimensional tables that I need to bring in here real quick, okay? Basically to extend on those, right? The customer number is informative and all, but I don't know C0001 versus C002. That doesn't tell me anything. So instead, I want to see who that customer actually is. So in this case, I just go find my customer table. In other ERPs or databases, it might not be exactly the same way, but same concept, right? So there we have that customer number. I want to bring in their customer name, and maybe I want to see their payment terms, right? Payment method, for instance, maybe too. It all depends on what elements you want to bring in, but you can, again, you could preview this and see what actually is being used. Oh, it looks like payment method's not being used, so let's not bring that in. But we can say show all. We could say, oh, maybe I wanted to bring in their address. Instead, I'll just bring in their city. Call it good. Okay, easy additions. We can add that in. And if I wanted to, at this point, I could just drag this customer table up because it's basically ready into my data warehouse. Right? Do a quick little renaming of anything. So I can say that's my company. This is my customer number. I kind of like keeping my numbers identified because that's what it's going to tie back to in my fact table, right? But that's effectively what's there. We'll do the same thing real quick for location and item, and then we'll move about kind of creating that data warehouse for us. So I'm going to go find my location table. And by all means, anybody has any questions, feel free to interject. Let me know. If you wanted to, you feel like you have the ability to direct this a little bit if you want to, okay? I'm just kind of showing a quick way of how we can build out some really powerful data warehouses in cubes, but we can add additional dimensions if you're curious about things. All right, so here we have my location. I just want to bring my location up here as another table. Maybe my locations aren't company specific, so I could remove that and then just say, have this just be my location code. And if I wanted to enforce that so that I don't see any duplications, add a primary key and tell it to enforce that primary key behavior, right? So now basically anytime I see a location code, I'll only get one of those location codes ever and all of the names that are associated with it, right? Same kind of thing could be done here with the customer table. If we wanted to make sure that that is a unique data set, we can basically add our primary key on the company and customer and set that up. As I keep going through this, let's go ahead and start pulling. Let's see, what was it? Oh, I needed item. Let's go get that real quick. There it is. And for this, we're just going to pull in our item's description and its number. There we go. And there's probably other things like maybe the inventory posting group makes sense. We can probably bring in like the product group code, right? Anything at this point really would be available to you. What we're going to be creating is all based off of key levels. In this case, the key level being the item number in the company. So as long as our fact tables, our sales invoice and our credit memo line tables, as long as our fact tables have the item numbers to tie back to our item table with, then we can bring in anything on that dimension that we need to, right? So we'll go ahead and prep this up into the data warehouse as well. And we'll call this item number. Cool. So, I mean, obviously there's probably, let's see, what is there more? There's customers, posting dates, locations, item numbers, and company. So let's go ahead and add just our date table real quick. Add a date table. Great. Right, the date table is kind of built in with the Jet Data Manager, so we don't have to create all of this. It kind of automatically knows what we want. And so I just create a data table up into my data warehouse and bring in a certain fields that I want. For instance, I just want to bring in my date value. And for the purposes of this, I'm just going to bring in my, we're just going to bring in month name, quarter name, and year name. There's lots of different levels. Depending on how you're going to try and use it, they all have some, some value to them. But in this case, I just wanted to have just a few things so I can kind of tie my date to some additional date levels, if that makes sense. And we'll call this actual date. Great. So I've kind of got my dimensional tables created, right? And you can see these are all tied to individual key levels, the date being the key, the company, customer, this item. I could do the same thing here. It's good practice to have those primary keys there, whether or not you're enforcing the primary key violations or not. It's good to set up that primary key at least. So I've created a bunch of dimensional tables up in my data warehouse, right? Customer, location, item, and date. As a last step of kind of creating this data warehouse, we're going to bring our sales invoice line and sales credit memo line tables up into a fact table here in the data warehouse. So to start off, what I'm doing is I'm just going to drag and drop sales invoice line onto my tables. And I'm going to call this my sales posted transactions, right? You'll notice that as I've been doing this, I'm kind of renaming things in my data warehouse. And the reason for that is to make it as easy as possible for my users to understand, but also to try and streamline this naming, right? People don't necessarily know what a DW account is. That's a portion of the Jet Data Manager, but this is the company, right? So I'm not going to leave hieroglyphic names out here for my users to be confused by. Instead, I'll rename it where possible. As a practice, I just kind of like to alphabetize my fields and leaving my measure fields down here at the bottom, so my amount and my quantity. In this case with number, this is actually the item number, so I'm going to go ahead and call it as such, right? But all of these fields that have the number at the end of it, with the exception of document, which we'll go address real quick, will tie to dimensional tables, right? Our bill to customer numbers tied to a customer, or location codes tied to a location. And so that's kind of the dimensional modeling aspect, right? At this point, this is just coming from our sales invoice line though, and I want to make sure that I kind of blend my sales credit memo line in there with it. And the Jet Data Manager makes this extremely easy. So to do so, I'm just going to drag and drop this table again, and I'm dropping it onto my fact table. And it gives me some options. I can tell it to smart synchronize, which is basically going to try and, try and identify matches where possible. I can tell it to synchronize. It says if you, put all of these fields over, whether or not you find a match. And then I can say just synchronize only the existing. It's pretty good when my fields are all named the same. So I'm going to say smart synchronize. And then we're just going to kind of explode this out so I can see all of my fields, right? Now you can kind of see what it's done. Each of these fields inside of my data warehouse, for instance, this company field, has a copy movement coming in from both the sales credit memo line as well as the sales invoice line. What that means is that the entirety of the sales invoice line table will also be alongside the entirety of this sales credit memo line table inside of my data warehouse. It's made it so that I don't have to query two separate tables, I can query one, right? And not only that, but we could have added additional calculations, like maybe I have a reported sales amount that only applies certain conditions, or maybe I want to bring in tax amounts and calculate that, or currency exchange, right? That's why we can do all of that stuff in the staging database, and we bring it up here in the data warehouse nice and clean. So I mentioned the document. Let's go ahead and round that out real quick. We'll just create a couple of document tables for sales invoices and sales credit. So sales invoice header, there we go. And it's going to be my number, this is the document number. And maybe I want to bring in like the document date, and well, let's preview it and find something good here real quick. Document date, I've already got the city on the customer, so let's not do that, but we could bring in language, order. Ooh, that'd be good, yeah. The order number, perfect. Right, tie back to our originating order. We'll do the same thing on our sales credit memo header, although I don't know that we'll have the order number there, but that's okay. So we're just going to bring in our number, document date, and let's see, does it have the order number? No, it doesn't, which makes sense being that it's a credit. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this rather than just saying, well, the document number is already here. Why go through the extra level to get that document date? The reason being is because a document can have multiple lines, right? Some documents can have hundreds of lines. And if we're trying to create a cube dimension off of a table that has hundreds of those, well, we're making analysis services work much harder than it actually needs to. And so instead, we're just going to create a kind of a defined dimension, in this case, the sales document dimension, that's going to be a more distinct listing of those document numbers. Just like we had added the primary key here to the item number to just enforce that that's unique, the sales document table is going to be kind of the same concept. So I'm just going to drop this. Oops. There we go. This is my document. And I'm going to make one extra change here because dates, I actually just want this to be a string. Reason being is if I make it a dimension level, I'm just kind of wanted to present this value rather than actually treat it as a date. Okay, so different things will apply different ways, but this is the idea here. So we're just going to say convert this, copy that over to our other one here. These are customizations, right? So I'm just kind of going through this nice and quick for the sake of this session. Oops. But these are customizations. Anything that's done within the SQL stack can be done as a customization. I can, add this transformation and say, custom value opens up anything inside of the SQLs. But I also have options like giving trims, fixed values, replacing characters, reversing signs, right? Those are all available. And if I use just this custom value and click add, you'll notice for those of you that know SQL, that this code that I'm kind of using is actual SQL code. What I'm doing is I'm saying take this document date and convert it into a varchar with the value of 101, right? Which is basically a text. It's month / day / year. Right? Gets rid of all of the timestamp elements and really makes this a string field rather than a date. Right? And the reason for that is because how analysis services treats dates as dimension levels. If I wanted it to be an actual date and create it as such, then that's where I would actually use this date dimension tied onto our posting date of the transactions. If I wanted to just kind of present it as like an informative piece, then I would bring it in as this instead. And lastly, there we have our order number. Great. So this sales document, much like with this credit memo table, we are going to have pulled, or much like our fact table, I should say, we're going to have pulling from both of our tables. You can see I've got document pulled in from both and the order number. I just need to make a copy movement for the company and document. I can do that like I showed earlier with doing the smart synchronize, or I can just drag and drop these fields and drop them in like so, right? And it's creating those copy movements for me. Since I only have an order from my invoice side, we'll just leave the one copy movement on that front. Great. So we're at a spot where we've created an entire data warehouse at this point, and now we're just on to creating cubes. So you'll probably notice I haven't actually created any tables, right? I've been doing a lot of stuff inside of this data warehouse. We've created some stuff here, but these are all red. They're all red because the Jet Data Manager is smart enough to know that it's basically analyzing my stage and my data warehouse databases, and it's showing these as red because these elements don't actually exist there, right? Or something has changed. If this table existed but I made a change, it would also show red. So at this point, I need to deploy and execute all of those changes. And what I mean by that can be demonstrated here in, we'll say all, and we're going to hit review tasks. So the deployment is creating, right? This is where, if I was going back into this discussion earlier, it's like saving all of the time. This is what's actually creating all of my tables. And within the table structure, it's creating some error tables for failovers. It's creating my transformation and my data cleansing views, right? And it's creating it for each one of these tables. I can go as far as creating actual foreign key relationships and making it so that those relationships are recognized through front-end tools, right? I wouldn't do that in my stage per se, but in maybe in my data warehouse I would, right? But we can see it's creating a lot of stuff. This is where the automation comes into play, right? I can deploy and execute this. It's going to build all of these elements, and then as the last step, it's going to execute our steps for each table. So once we look inside of the execution, you can see it's really just doing two things. It's transferring data from the source over to my stage, to my raw table. And then it does a data cleansing step, which is any of our customizations, such as this document date string customization, get applied through this data cleansing step. Okay, so as I click start here, we'll just go ahead and say go for it. And we're going to keep an eye on it, but you'll see how quickly it's doing all of these elements for us, right? And there's no way anyone could do that by hand nearly as quick. Not only are you trying to create different SQL scripts to do such things, but you'd also be trying to then execute SSIS packages, which is where this next step comes in, where it's actually filling the databases, right? This is kind of a visual Gantt chart, if you will. The colors do mean things. The blue is any data cleansing step. The orange is a data transfer. So moving data from point A to point B, and then we do our data cleansing on it after the fact, right? So at this point, that's all done. It's executed data all the way through to my data warehouse. And if I was to preview my sales posted transactions table, now I have data in my fact table, right? Lots of informative data points. To that point, like I was mentioning, like if I needed to do a change or something, right? Maybe I just needed to add a field here and I wanted to call this, maybe I actually just go to each of the tables and add the document type or something like that, right? It probably would be the headers that would have the document types. Let's see, maybe line. Okay, we'll just use description, for instance. So I'm going to pull in a new field, right? My sales invoice line, and then on my sales credit memo line, I'm going to go up here and find its description as well, right? The data manager has marked these tables as red for me now because I've made changes to them, right? And I can also bring these up into my data warehouse, right? And so I've kind of appended the design in just a few seconds, and we can then deploy and execute these changes. And what it's going to do is it's not only going to rebuild all of those tables that we just built, but it's also going to repopulate it with those changes, right? And for anyone that's actually done this kind of stuff in person, in hand, you'll hopefully realize how powerful that is, right? In days past, when you were building a data warehouse by cube, if somebody says, hey, you need to make this new change, well, that means you have to go find all of your table create scripts. You have to adjust all of those scripts and go through a peer review process usually, and then get it pushed out and then get a scheduled execution for your SSIS, right? All these extra steps. We did it in 15 seconds, right? So the Jet Data Manager is extremely quick on that kind of turnaround. And not only that, we now have a data warehouse out here that's cleanly named. My users could understand what's what, right? Not even knowing what's there, they could look at these tables and understand what they're looking at. So as the last step, let's build this into a cube. So I'm going to add a new cube here. We're just going to call this sales. And I'm going to select my main fact table, this sales posted transactions. For a cube to be a real cube, I'm a real boy now. For a cube to be a real cube, it has to have at least one measure and one dimension. So we're going to go ahead and add our sales measure. And we're just going to sum it up, round it to the nearest. It's not actually rounding it. This is just presenting as a rounded number. I could come in here and actually have it show as like $sign and all of the change if I wanted to, like just kind of rounding it up. And I'm just going to leave it to preserve nulls if I wanted it, if they're there. Right. So as easy as that, this is just the logic, and you can kind of see I don't have to know a lot about creating measures. I can just say this is my field, right? This is the field I want to select. What do I want to do? I want to sum it. Do I want to count it? Right? Do I want to find the first of them? Right? In this case, I just want to sum those sales. I am going to add one more measure, so I'm just going to click this little +1. It's a nice little shortcut, and then say just quantity. Select that quantity field and set that to round as well. Right. As easy as that is, I can now click OK. Both of those measures are kind of coded in, if you will, into my sales cube. The second side of this is dimensional tables. And again, the Jet Data Manager makes that very easy too. I can start off, I can just drag and drop tables from my data warehouse into my dimensions, and it's going to start creating this. Do you want to create these as the primary keys? Sure, because I already created a primary key on the table. It found it and it's asking what I want to add to it, right? I can come in here and then say just add these additional fields, check what it came back with, company and customer number. I'm actually going to do this slightly different so that the customer number is what's shown, because I want that to be seen like that. And then the name is actually this name field. So I changed it a little bit from what it wanted to be, right? And we'll just call this now, this is just going to be customer, cool. And then that's customer name. So there's, a couple of little things that I wanted to change to the dimension, obviously up to the designer's purview at that point. If I didn't do the drag and drop, I could instead just say create a new dimension by right clicking there and saying, oh, I want to create an item dimension. It's on my item table. My key level is the item number, but I do want to show the description here, and I'm going to split it out by saying a space, right? This key and name layout is basically giving me a key and name where my key is the item, the name is the description. That's my key level there for this dimension. And then I can do that same quick levels piece here where I want to bring in maybe the description and those posting groups. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of breeze through these other two dimensions real quick so that we have them here. Customer, location, item, document. Cool. And our date. So with our date, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to create this. Dates are treated a little bit differently than a lot of other dimensional tables, simply because they imply an actual thing that is true for everybody. So this is date, and we're going to call this days. And I'm not going to go all the way into creating a full hierarchy of my year, quarter, month, day column here, but I did want to make sure that my day level was set up correctly there. There it is, and then we'll just add in our quick month levels of the quarter and the month. Oops, and the year.
Here we are. Hey, Ryan, Tristan here.
Oh, am I over?
Nope, we got about we're 15 minutes left. We have 6, 7 questions
Oh, great.
in the queue that have come in. Don't want to interrupt and stop you. Just want to let you know we got about 15 minutes and we want to leave some time for those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for the heads up. So, yep. So I'm on the final approach here. So I've created all my dimensions and my measures. The last step is just adding them to my cube. So I'm just going to drag and drop this up here. I could also say just add these this way and select in the dimensions that I want. The last step is just to relate them. Telling the cube, how does this dimension relate to my table? And in this case, I'm just kind of mapping it out to be whatever field I want. So I'm going to map it to my sell to customer, map my date to my posting date, right? And this is just kind of mix and match. So long as you have a field that applies your key on your fact table, you can join your dimension on. Cool, right? And then, even going a step further, we could create like last year measures and year to dates and all that good stuff here. This is kind of, again, streamlined, but lastly, I'll deploy and execute this. Oh, because I've got a reserved word in there. So let me come out here. We'll call this location. Cool. Did the same thing on sales document. Yep. I don't see that. So we'll just delete this so I can deploy my cube. Cool. So everything deployed successfully. Sorry I deleted the document, but it was erring on a name field. Oh. All right. So I was going to try and show the cube once it finished, but I've got a permission missing on my SQL Server box that while I could do it, if we have 6 questions, I want to make sure everybody gets their questions answered. So Tristan, if you wouldn't mind, do you want to transition over to the questions for me?
Yeah. All right. So first question that came in, this was from earlier in your presentation here. How difficult is it to pull in data? It says, I saw how you said and showed you could connect to the cloud data and other data sources.
Mm-hmm.
How would a new user do something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So any data source that you have out there is going to be connected to from one way or another, right? So historically, like databases that are from like the 80s and 90s, ODBC was the way to connect, right? So if it's an older source, then ODBC drivers will be available for that. If it's an Excel file, right, you can just say add to an Excel file, browse for wherever that is inside of your computer and pull it in that way. If it's not one of these sources that's kind of listed here, right, where it's not a SQL source, it's not a Excel or an ODBC, but it's something that's out there in the cloud, that's where we'd actually start using the CData connector. And to show you kind of what's out there, I would just come into Tools, Manage CData Providers. And this is where a lot of the other stuff like the Google Analytics, the Salesforces, the Google Sheets, this is how we can get into all of those. As I click Add, we'll be presented with a list of the drivers that are available out there for us. Right, so we can hook into, say, Azure, or we can hook into, there's a generic ADO driver for CSPs if you had something fine. There's a Business Central one, right? So there's Google Ads. Where's Google Analytics? There it is, right? So there's lots of different options out here. You can even hook into PayPal, for instance. So anything that's on this list, we could then add in our, we'll just add in our PayPal one here. Did it actually do it? No, it did not. We'll say Google Analytics then. All right, I check the box, it adds it in, downloads the provider, and then now that it's available, now when I come into my data sources, if I was to add a CData data source, it is available from my provider list, right? So any of those drivers that are listed in that CData can be brought in here. We can call this my Google data source. And then obviously with cloud-based data sources, a lot of them are using OAuth, right? So I would have to go through, get the OAuth cert keys and kind of add that in here. But that's the long and the short of it, right? Once you've got that in here, it's set up and we can start pulling data in just like we would a SQL database.
Great. This next question, I think, ties right into where you are right now. It's asked, is there a database essentially it can add or you cannot connect to?
I haven't found one yet. There's some cloud-based services that kind of hide their data a little bit, right? So it makes it so you can't necessarily connect directly, but usually then you can get a CSV export on a schedule, right? And so that's kind of the fail-safe is if the data is behind a firewall or a paywall, you can usually do like a CSV export of some sort, and then pull it in just like you would a flat file here, right? So we can come and say, add a multiple text file data source, and we can just point this to a folder full of CSVs. So if you got a daily CSV or something like that. I have never found a SQL. I've never found a database that we can't connect to that we actually have access to, right? There's always a way, whether it's getting the right ODBC driver in place, which is usually the trickiest part for some of those older sources. But anything that's kind of modern is pretty straightforward.
What about, there's another one came in, you know, you're talking about a variety of data sources and such. What about data from Word documents or something like that?
Yeah, so if it was in a Word document, what we'd want to do is we'd want to save it as a CSV. So if you were to receive Word documents on a regular basis, what we could do is we could have a batch script that kicks off that says, you know, find Word documents in this folder, do such a thing, and then put it over here. Whether that's a batch script, or you could even use like Power Automate, which has also been a pretty cool little tool lately that you can kind of modify how that data is stored and then pull it in. It does not actually have a Word integration, right? Because typically data is going to be either in a text file or an Excel file if it's file based. So there's not a Word document per se, but if you saved that Word doc as a text file, then yeah.
Okay. I think we got a couple more here, and we should wrap up. We wrapped up with the questions. So 1 second here. Question came in: is this available on mobile and tablet as well?
That's a great question. So the Jet Data Manager, which is the tool that we've been showcasing here, it does require that it's kind of set up on a machine. For instance, if I was to minimize this, you know, I'm on a box that actually has SQL Server installed, right? It's a regular old system, you know, right? It's a machine. And so this is an application. Now, the databases that come out of this are absolutely available through a mobile front end, right? At the end of the day, this creates a SQL data warehouse and a SQL analysis services CubeSet, which can be exposed externally. These right now are internally on mine, but if I was to just, you know, open up SQL and connect to, well, the cubes didn't finish, so let me just connect to the data warehouse here, right? And so any front end tool that you had could write to this, like Power BI, for instance. You could have a data gateway set up on your machine. You could write a report against this sales posted transactions table, and you could publish it up to the Power BI cloud with no problem. So, yep.
Great.
Hopefully that answers your question there.
I think it did pretty good. All right, I think it's the last question here that I have come in. Is there a difference in functionality from on-premise or cloud hosted?
Not
like,
for the
I guess on your end.
Yeah, not for the Jet Data Manager itself, right? So, I mean, to refer back to James, our VP of Platform Services, his session yesterday, he had a graphic on one of his slides that says, "What if I was to tell you there are no clouds?" Right? And basically, at the end of the day, it's a server, whether it's on in your location, your on-premises location, or if it's in the cloud, which basically just means it's in somebody else's location, right? So the Jet Data Manager, whether it's on-premises or in the cloud, works the same. Right, a lot of people opt to kind of put this out in the Azure space or in an Amazon Redshift space. We here at Tigunia also offer hosting, right? So we have our own server stacks that we can set up and are faster and cheaper than Azure's. So we have a lot of people that are doing that kind of cloud hosting with the Jet Data Manager. And then, yeah, presenting that data through cloud front ends is common too.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions that have come in. Is there anything else? We've got about 5 minutes left here. So is there anything else you wanted to go over? Anything else you wanted to bring to the table? Maybe you wanted to take that dive back into that portion you were at a moment ago and jump into that fix?
Yeah, I mean, I sure could real quick because it's right here. So what it errored out on was a security permission thing. So I can come in here and add, yeah, there it is. Give this guy a little bit more elevated permissions. It's because the account that's running my analysis services didn't have read access to the data warehouse that we just created, which makes sense, right? I hadn't told it that it had access. So now that that's there, I should be able to DNE this cube set. Cool. Now that's executing successfully. You know, the Gantt colors, green for dimensions, yellow for cube. And now that that's done, I can preview this in any front end. I'll just use Excel since everyone's familiar with Excel. And I'm just going to use just native Excel and say get data from a database from analysis services, right? My server is this guy here. And there's that sales cube we created, right? I actually, yep, just make sure. So we'll say finish, okay. And now we can see the two dimensions that I built in, sales and quantity, and I can start slicing and dicing this by all of our various dimensions that we've built in. So I could say maybe show this, you know, oh, didn't like my date dimension. Okay, that's fair. But let's say show it by location. Cool. And then let's see my customers underneath that. Great. And then I can see, you know, kind of a display of their item posting groups and inventory posting groups, right? And so they're a very easy, quick way of just kind of pulling this together. And let's change. Oh, Teams, get out of my way. Cool. Put this into tabular mode and show all my item labels down and do this. All right, so very quickly we've created a pivot table off of this that you know, is kind of showing us all of that data from the cube set that we've built. It's all dimensional, so as I pull some of these out, I don't necessarily need to see that. Perhaps maybe I want to see it by, you know, location and product group, or maybe I just want to see product group. Right? It's dynamically changing as I go through this. We can add charts to this very easily. Right? So you could just say I want to see. Yeah, probably a column chart makes the best sense. And we'll sort this by bingo. Make this a lot bigger, hide all of our buttons. Right, and now we've got a chart. So very quickly, you can kind of turn this cube data into a chart. It looks like sales is a little bit bigger than quantity, makes sense. So let's remove that and sort our quantity instead. Right, and so now you can have a quantity by product group. And that was where I was going to end with that cube design, right? So from an hour ago till now, we've created a data warehouse in cube off of a SQL BC database all the way up into a cube, and have even built a chart off of it. All right, so you've heard of dashboard in 5 hours or dashboard in a day. Well, this is better than that. This is a whole cube in less than an hour. So hopefully it's been informative. If you like Jet Analytics, if you like what you see here, definitely reach out to myself or Tristan. We'd be happy to answer any further questions you have. We can show this to you in your environment, see what it looks like. And we have a full team of people that service this day in and day out. So reach out if you have it already and just need some help.
Great. Awesome presentation there, Ryan. You know, for everybody that saw, he goes pretty quick at times. That he's very thorough in his process. He's been doing it for many years. The great thing is this session is recorded, so it'll be available to all the attendees in the coming days. All right. So thank you all, everyone, for attending the session today. Again, we really hope the information provided today was beneficial for you and your team. Keep in mind, we have multiple more presentations through today and into tomorrow as well at Tigunia Virtual Forum. We hope you can join us and attend those educational tracks. All right. Well, if you'd like to connect, Ryan, if you want to go to that next slide into your presentation there, we can go to that last one. It should show off the ability for you to reach out to us at info@tigunia.com or connect@tigunia.com. Ryan mentioned you can reach to him directly. That's just fine. Or you can reach myself, Tristan. So, and that's Tristan@tigunia.com.
Yep, and mine would be Ryan at Tigunia, RYAN at Tigunia.com. Yep.
Great. Well, again, thank you everyone so much for your time today. I really appreciate you joining the presentation. Hope you learned quite a bit and learned more about us throughout the day and into the week. Again, reach out to us at connect@tigunia.com. Have a great rest of your day.
Yep.
Bye
Thanks
now.
for the attention and all the questions, everybody. Have a great day.